Welcome, one and all, to Intermediate Selfology with yours truly, Tristan McGough. And today we're going to deal with cognition and cognizance, and particularly the 8 processes that go into what we call cognition, or the flow of consciousness, and the associated sets of cognizances, that is, those stale images, those freeze frames that we take of reality in order to interpret it. So all of this, of course, takes place in terms of selfology, where we have the naturally arising, pristine cognitions of itself. That is, all of us as conscious beings have the ability to see ourselves as conscious beings, but at the same time as parts of a whole, at the same time as unique as each of us is as a single entity or an aeon, or part of the vastness of reality in which all our parts are ever changing as we're taking infinity as transfinite beings, and, if you will, manifested in terms of finite events and experiences and episodes. Now, today what I wanted to cover were these processes of cognition themselves. First of all, difference. Cognition is the process, right? It's like a tensegral rhapsody. It is always flowing, and it's a wave motion, a vibrational motion of consciousness itself. It never stands still. Where, on the other hand, a cognizance is a state of consciousness. It is where that moment of consciousness, your finite moment of consciousness, is interpreted in terms of the scenes that you have, the sections of space that you behold with a particular sense, even if it's hearing the space that you're hearing from the sound coming across space into your ears. All of it are part and parcel of consciousness, which, as we call it, pure awareness, is broke up into a perception of the spirit and attention of the soul. And as soma, we have apperception. We use our somatic apparatus and the various sensory doorways in order to apprehend the world. Or that apprehension, remember, meaning grasping, is not just passive. I'm not just interpreting the world. I'm also participating and actively participating within it. You've probably seen this in one of my previous episodes where I speak about the processes of cognition and the associated cognizantal sets. So here you have the processes that are listed. There are 8 of them. And then the cognizant sets are in the yellow type. So the whole set is this, cognizant. So what's in cognizance? What goes to make up a state of consciousness? Well, in terms of the processes, there's apperception, there's accession, and that relates to the will. Apprehension relates to the mind. Appropriation is the process that relates to feelings. You appropriate feelings in the same way that you actuate life or doing, and that relates to the life aspect. And then there are 3 aspects, which, if you will, are totally related to something called omnifinity. That is, it is your contribution that you're making at the very moment to the omnifinite realm, if you will, which is not just the finite, it's not just the infinite, it's not just the transfinite, but it's a contribution that's being made first of all, to the universe in terms of you're participating in it as you see exteriority, as you see yourself as an embedded subject, and all of this around as extruded objects. And as well as the bythos, or to the multiverse, it's related as authentication, that is, as I, me. This is this interiority, which is, as far as the rest of finity and finite reality is involved, is a transreal realm. It's transfinite. It goes on and it integrates other aspects of experience that it has no right to associate. That's where you can confabulate and bring up Griffin-like monsters in your own imagination. These processes themselves I've distilled into for the archaic self. Now, remember, the archaic self is that self which integrates those three selves that are the focal settings that see infinity, or your transcendent self, the focal setting that sees the transfinite realm, your innerscape, and that's your transcendental ego, that's your epistic self, and then your empiric self is what is part and parcel of the finite world and all its causation and entities and spatial sections and spans of time. So these eight together constitute cognition. And as you can see, there is no single factor that makes up cognition. Cognition is just not apperception. But it includes as well the accession of will. And it includes the apprehension that takes place by mind and the appropriation by your feeling faculty, as well as in terms of the dimension of doing. That's where you actually have the actuation taking place. And the other three, the authentication through your own inner experience, and the, I call it asteration, that is where you see yourself as embedded amongst a sea of other objects or stars, and these are all at some distance from what appears to be your center, but you are firmly implanted, embedded within the same thing that all of this is embedded. And then accession is this sense of everything being developed all and unfolded and achieved all at once. In terms of just looking at the empiric self, which I want to do, it's the empiric self that I want to look at in terms of these 8 processes of consciousness, all the way from apperception through accession. I want you to note, first of all, let's just take, what is accession? It's the plethoric in terms, there's object, there's interject, and there's subject, right? There's a subject that has an object, and then it creates an interject, which is an idea. The object is out there. If it never had a subject beholding it, there would be no idea created. In the same way, if there were no object out there to be held, that particular idea would not have been mentated. So, both subject and object are interdependent, they're co-founded in creating the interject, which is what actually happens with the epistic self. So you'll see in terms of apperception, I know I was going to deal with accession, let's go up to apperception instead. That relates to the self, and that's the intuiting aspect. That's true knowing. Knowing isn't a justified true belief. Knowing is the intuition of self-evidencing experience. You don't need anybody to tell you that you are conscious of being conscious. In fact, any litmus test would do nothing more than distract you from holding attention to the fact that you have self-evidentiary consciousness of itself, and that's apperception. Well, when it comes to the empiric self, that is personal. That's the object producer, right? This is what we just said. That object can't be produced as a phenomena unless there's an empiric self with its sensory apparatus to behold it. But that depends on the attention of the epistic self, as well as it is the interject producer as the ahamkara. Ahamkara is often rendered as the I maker. It is actually that generative part of the I that creates every me. Every time that you say, well, I'm this, I'm that, that's the me that you've generated. This is an interject. And this is the interject that's produced and these ideas that you constantly refer to in your psychic environment. In terms of the subject producer, that's produced by, if you will, your monad. In the same way that the empiric self has a cognizance which is personal, and the epistic self has a cognizance which is ahamkaric, where you always know that it's yours, it's your thought, it's your feeling, you generate it. And in terms of the anasic self, there is the monadic element, where you as an aeon, as a centered self, a singular and sole stream of consciousness, as much as you interact with others and as much as your multifaceted composition constitutes you, all of that still allows you to say, I am, in all these very facets. But here, in the anasic self, you know yourself as the subject producer. You're the very ground that produces the subject. All right, that's taking it across on a roll. Now let's go back and let's just look at the cognizances, the 8 cognizances, the states of consciousness, from the angle of the empiric self, the self that's bound in this finite world, this world that's measurable and quantifiable. Well, the first thing we noticed is that in terms of apperception, it sees everything that happens here in the empirical world of experience as personal. In the same way that the will exceeds, if you will, or accesses, like assuming a throne or the crown, the will, through accession, sees your cognizance, your state of consciousness as private. It's yours. And it protects it, so it's the object protector. In terms of the object percipient, well, that of course is the apprehension of the mind, and that turns what is a putative object in the external world into an actual phenomenon. A phenomenon is something that you behold. So it's the interject. That's the phenomenon. The phenomenon won't exist without you as a conscious mind that built that idea. That thing is a phenomena, right? I mean, when I hold this page up, this is a phenomena to you. This is something that you are going to look at and that you are going to say, well, that's a thing. But the only thing you're seeing is the surface. You don't see what's on the back. You don't know what I've got written there. But you automatically, the mind automatically places a latent image, right, to make this three-dimensional. It is not allowed, in terms of the mind, the gestalt of the empirical world, that there should be a front side without a back side. In the same way that when we don't see the other side of the tree, we still assume that it's there. And if I were to attempt to describe it just from a speculative viewpoint, without moving around that tree, I could probably imaginatively do so, although it wouldn't correspond exactly to that tree. So we're seeing that, first of all, in terms of all of these elements, that there is some way that they treat the object. That's what the empiric self does. It interacts, it's participant with objects, it's active and it's passive. So in terms of its appropriation, how it feels, well, it's possessive. It is my. You'll hear these in arguments. It's my feelings. You don't know the way that I feel. Well, that is that factor of feeling of the heart where you know that dimension and you intuit it directly. And of course, nobody else intuits it directly as you do. So actuation is performative in terms of the object player. This is the object player. That is, my consciousness is performative, my cognizance. Every time that I am going to grasp something, I'm performing. Consciousness performs. That's its doing. That's its life and vivacious. In the same way that that element is perdurant. When I have a cognizance, I'm placing it within a well-sedimented field of other phenomena and cognizances which I've had prior. And I'm assuming I'm going to have a lot more as they unfurl here from this moment to the next. So there's a perdurance that takes place. That's the object preserver. And that's that sense of interiority that authentication brings. And that we have here is perdurant. And then it's peculiar. That is, as in the study of forensic science or criminology, if somebody has what's called peculiar knowledge, for instance, they knew that somebody owned a particular something and they lost it at a certain time, and if they reveal that, well, they know something particular about that, and that's peculiar knowledge. This is the kind of peculiarity we are all involved in all the time. We are all involved in a very peculiar, that is, a particularly arranged existence. All of these together constitute the 8 different ways that when we have a cognizance, that is, when we have a state of consciousness in this finite world, it is this. It is personal, it's private, it's possessive, it's percipient, it's performative, it's perdurant, as well as it is peculiar, and it fits into the whole. It is never just a partial thought or a partial phenomena. It's plethoric. It's filled in completely. And that's the plethoric aspect of empiric cognizances. In a similar fashion, we could go through the other with the atapistic cognizances of the interjective cognition. The other was the objective. That's where you get the phrase of the objective world. What you are is as an empiric self with an empirical ego that is set at the focal setting of finitude. You are interpreting all the particulars according to those segments, those partitions of reality, partly mental and partly within the physical stream of causation that makes things into tables and chairs with the help of conscious entities. Here are the 8 epistic cognizances, which I'll go through very quickly. In terms of the ahamkarak, we are dealing with the self-maker, and that is the interject producer. You know that it's your thoughts that you're producing. It's also intentional. That's the interject protector. You're the one that protects your ideas. You can either distort them, make them malleable, melt them down and reformulate them, but they're all intentional. So you would protect your own interjects or your own ideas. It's intermedial. That is, when you're apprehending something, you're always having something that is intermediate between you and the outside world. Here it's the body. I see certain things, and then of course my senses transmit that to my brain, but all along, consciousness at the various levels, it's all transparent to consciousness, including the feelings and the thoughts that arise thereof. It's co-founded. That is, the interject possessor. The idea, as I brought up, is not just the subject. It is not just an object. It's the two of those that have come into contact and which creates that idea. So they're co-founded. And it is preformative. That is, before anything has ever happened, consciousness at the epistic level and cognizances already has its proclivities, its samskaras, its compositional factors that are all there waiting to act as motives, as wellsprings of action. So it is preformative, and it's the interjector player in that sense. And often, what do? We keep playing the same old record again and again. It's reconstitutive in terms of its interiority. There's no time in which you're having an experience as the epistic self or the soul that it is not entirely reconstituting your psychical being. Every impact is like a stone hitting the lake of your consciousness, excuse me, and creating ripples. And as well, it's indexical. It is one thing, anything that is taken within the world is an index of the rest of the world to it. Take the world, add everything up together, and this is an index of the rest of it as its negation. But anyway, the indexicals are the particulars. It's your coordinates in space and time. It's what it's composed of, etc. And it's omniregulative. The thing about the epistic consciousness and the cognizance is it regulates all of these occurring at the same time. That's the plethoric element that we were speaking of in terms of the totality. And in terms of the empiric self, it is always filling in and making a complete object. Well, omniregulative is that the processes by which the forms are created within the mind are all regulated all at once. In terms of the 8 inasic cognizances of subjective cognition, we shall touch upon them very quickly. They relate to the ensilog. That is the way being speaks directly to itself, if you will, in terms of infinity. And here we have the monadic, which is the subject producer, the mahatic, and that is the subject protector. The mahat is the one mind. All the consciousness and all the minds and all the matters, they are all at one. There's not one thing operating without cooperating with everything else. And what is the basis of that cooperation is the single substance mahat. So that's the subject protector. It protects all subjects as conscious beings. The numinogenic is that part, and that's of course relating to the thinking, and that's the subject percipient. The subject percipient is always seeing itself as the subject, consciously entertaining some object. Then there's the prevailing, which is of course related to life and the doing, and that's the subject player. At the level of infinity, nothing trumps it. It's all prevailing. And in terms of authentication, in terms of interiority, with the agnostic self, that is the very centricizing factor that gives one a sense of self-conscious identity. That's the interiority of authentication. That's where you know you're an authentic being because you are self-evidencing your own vibration. Coherent, of course, relates to the external world, and that's where the subject is placed in a sea of intersubjectivity. And the pernodic is the subject plenifier. In the same way that there's an object plenifier, the plethoric aspect, and there's an interject plenifier, which is the omniregulative aspect, there's a pernodic aspect. Perna, which means complete, full, whole. In terms of the complete and full whole, that's the archaic self as it utilizes the agnostic, the epistic, and the empiric selves, co-founded, cooperating, cohesively integrated, and working together as apperception, attention, and apprehension. So until next time, my friends, behave when you must. Be good whenever you can. But above all else, be yourself.